disturbing dream. It's a very literal title this week. It is about the king's dream, King Nebuchadnezzar. And we are exploring part 1 of chapter 2. And King Nebuchadnezzar has this very vivid and disturbing dream. He brings his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to order them to interpret this dream. And so today we're going to look at why the king responded in this way to this particular dream. I'm sure he's had other dreams in the past as well. And then how Daniel's response can show us how God can guide us towards wisdom and tact with just a simple act of praying and then requesting that God can and does meet our needs. What I hope we can take away from this is that seeking wisdom is not to get a simple revelation of something in the moment. But in order to seek this wisdom, we must also prepare a place for it to flourish. We must prepare our hearts for it to grow, for it to connect with us, if you will. Wisdom, I think, will only be received, godly wisdom that is, will only be received into a heart and mind that desires to be wise and seek understanding from God, but for also his glory and for his purposes. When I first read not necessarily the dream, I suppose I did read that as well, but I did, it's all right. I did think about sometimes the dreams that I have. I'm going to give you an insight into some of the strange things that I've experienced, and I think why the king, maybe this is a similar experience maybe to what I have, and I will say now, I don't mind if you don't have this experience when you dream. I don't really mind. It's just what I've gone through, but maybe give you a little picture of how it may feel, maybe how Nebuchadnezzar might have seen it. There's dreams that I have that are so vivid, that are so clear, that for at least probably 30 seconds after I wake up, it feels like I'm still in, the dream is part of my reality. There's a weird thing that goes on that it doesn't happen very often, but it's so vivid and so strong that I wake up thinking that's a sort of reality for a very short time. And then suddenly 30 seconds, you're aware where you are and you wake up and you think, okay, that's not real. And I do wonder, I know if we get to the text next week, you'll see just how vivid the king's dream is and maybe get that sense of why he woke up so disconcerted by all. Sometimes I've had dreams only realizing afterwards, but I've had many occasions of deja vu. That is experiences where you feel like you've had the exact thing happen already in the past, but then it's happening again. I have to say, it's not anything spectacular. It could literally be standing there speaking to someone about the weather, and then suddenly I think, hang on, in this exact moment, for a few seconds, I think, I've had this conversation before. Literally in this moment, with this person, in this environment, with these specific conditions. And that itself can be disconcerting. It's normally brief and it's over quickly, but it still can be a little disturbing. And I don't claim to have any special abilities to tell the future. And they are remarkably insignificant things that I see. And they're just mostly moments where I might have had a conversation for a few seconds. But every time I know that those particular events have come from a dream, I immediately know it can't be that I've experienced it, so I must have dreamed it. And this is going to sound weird to you because you're going to think he's a little bit crazy. But if you read the Bible, this does happen. God does give dreams to people. He does also give visions. And to give you a definition, dreams are obviously when you're asleep. Visions are when you're awake. And so we'll see that, and we'll see that in Daniel. But there is this sense sometimes that I certainly experience this sort of deja vu, but more the king's dream I think we'll see is more of this sense of he was in a reality. He was seeing into a reality, but couldn't quite explain what it was about. And so I think it might help, just from my own experience as I've read this and think, I can see why he might have said what he said and done what he done. Nebuchadnezzar's dream is much more like he experienced a future reality, a future time. And maybe he had the same feeling being in a reality for a short while after he awoke. So let's dive into our first few verses. Daniel 2, 1-3. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream that troubles me and I want to know what it means. Excuse me. In the ancient world, certainly of this time, dreams were considered to have a huge significance, to the point that dreams were considered communication from the gods. And I say not the God of the Bible in this particular context, but from the gods that they worship, small g gods, as it were. The king, in this case, would likely have believed it to be from the goddess of love and wars, Ishtar, as we looked at last week, or even another one of those gods, but of that occult belief. So he would have thought that's a communication from a god. He would have also believed it to be a dream of the future. And so when we're understanding why we're told about this particular dream, it is important to understand the weight he's attached to this dream, and therefore why he then responds the way he does. So for the king, he believes his gods have spoken to him, and so wants to understand what this communication is all about. Now, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, astrologers are what could be seen, certainly at that time, as the king's cabinet. They advised the king on matters of state. This is no joke. Magicians and enchanters advising the king what to do of issues of state. And thankfully, we don't have a government system that does such a thing today. But, sometimes you do wonder, maybe they do have a couple of people in government that are tapping into this stuff. But these advisors were part of this Babylonian system, religious system, and claimed they could predict the future. They gave them often pictures, as it were, or visions, I say in quotes, of the future. They were part of the occult, a system of supernatural beliefs and practices that were not rooted in any organized religion or even, at times, even science itself. And so we would have people that were talking about, claiming to know things when actually turns out they probably knew nothing. And on that basis, the king tells them not only to interpret the dream, but to tell him that what was in the dream. And some people have debated over this. They think maybe the reason why is he couldn't quite remember it, and that might be true also. But remember, the king has brought these people into his inner circle, advisors, because he is under the belief that they can tap into the occult, this world, spiritual world, as it were, this dark world, and bring out and know exactly what he actually dreamed. And now, if they can truly do that, of course, and have this power, then they would be able to tell the king the actual dream he had. And I think this, in a weird way, this did remind me of what I see more and more of events happening in pubs around this area, and a few others that I've seen, when I've seen events for clairvoyance and tarot card readings and all sorts of dangerous stuff like that. And I have to say, I've still not heard or found anyone that has been able to prove such abilities without having to have gained some information beforehand about the person, before they then reveal what is in their so-called future. There's a technical term for this in my industry, in cybersecurity. We call it social engineering, and that is that what you do is you ask a bunch of questions that sound really innocent, and you gain a load of information about the person. And this is similar to what they would do. They would then use that information to make it sound like they know something about you, when actually what they've done is that they've actually got the information from you first and read it back to you in a different way. You see, and that's mostly how they operate when they do these things. And so there are many charlatans out there. There's many con artists out there. But let me also say, and should give a warning, about those that can give insight into your future, claim to be clairvoyant or tarot card readers. If they can do that for real, There is one simple but disturbing explanation for it. They are dabbling in the occult practices and engaging with things that are otherworldly. It's probably not common that that would happen, but if they can do it without even asking you one single question, there is the likelihood they might be tapping into actually something that is not of this world, as it were. It's entirely possible for people to engage with demonic powers and spirits without fully understanding the consequences of their actions. And this stuff is addictive. This stuff is destructive. So what I want to tell you that I think the majority of them are con artists. I think they are con artists. They're spinning a yarn, as the saying goes. But there are some that are dabbling in powers that are dangerous to themselves and to those who put their trust in them. Leviticus 19 verse 31 says, "Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." Remember, we looked at stuff like this last week when we know where Daniel was rooted in terms of the law. He would be observing this straight away. He would know that these people exist. Galatians 5, 19 to 21 says the acts of their sinful nature are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, with maybe the exception of the astrologers that we read about, whose knowledge was maths and writings and the stars, the so-called enchanters and sorcerers are probably exposed here as charlatans as we continue to look into the next verses. Daniel 2, 4 to 12 says, "Then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic," and so they're switching Hebrew to Aramaic, Aramaic to Hebrew. There's a switch later on as well. "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you'll receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream and we will interpret it." They won't give up. Then the king answered, "I am certain that you're trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I've firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there's just one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men." This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. Yeah, sounds extreme, doesn't it? But I'm going to give some reasons to why this might have happened. The king here is actually only asking of them the things that they claimed that they could all do. He's not asking any extra of what they could do. Now, the request itself, they say no king's ever asked that. That is true. If they're saying that, I believe them. However, the power of which he's asked them to do it by is the power they claim to have already claimed to have. So it's not out of the realms of possibility that the king is asking something that's wildly impossible. These people made a living out of their so-called powers to contact gods and get secrets from the spiritual realm. Now, what the king then says is, if you cannot tell me my dream, then for all this time you have been misleading me about your abilities. You have been lying to me. And in fact, the punishment for his advisors, I think, is not so much about not being able to tell him the specific dream he had, rather that if they cannot tell him, then they have been deceiving him all this time. The punishment is in fact for their deception. And when you read about this, there are many people that say, well, he's probably doing that because he's just going down the other end of the spectrum and now he's just angry about this. But actually, he is having a revelation type moment where these liars are being exposed. And so he says, well, that means if you can't do that, you've been lying about all of this all along, which means all the advice you've given me is wrong. All the advice is just you making it up. You've been deceiving me. Now, I don't want to sound defending the king here, because this king is horrible, by the way. He has been allowed by God to rule over the people, but he is still a horrible king. But I think when I was looking at this, I want to clarify there is more reason to this than just saying he's lashing out. And so I think what he wants to do is he's coming to a more clarifying moment of what these people are actually doing, the people he's invited into his inner circle. Their admission from his advisors was that indeed only the gods could reveal such things, even if the mechanics maybe of who could actually do it was mainly incorrect. They referred to the gods that could do it, but the broad principle was an admission that only God could do such things. If you even just disregard the moment of they're talking about their own gods, they are making a broad claim that actually only God can do such things. And much like Paul said, you're kind of close when he went to Greece. He said, you're sort of there, but you still don't know the Christian God. You don't know the true God that rules over you. But their goal was to perhaps show the king that he was being unreasonable. And so they do it with this kind of, I suppose, gentleness, but at the same time they're saying to him, I think we're trying to say you're being unreasonable about this request. The problem is if they believe that their God spoke to them through dreams, then the king is well within his rights to ask what he is asking. And I think for this a saying comes to mind about these people. You've made your bed, now lie in it. They didn't want to lie in this bed. They hated this bed. They made this thing because actually it made them lots of money, gave them such influence among the nation because they had power around the king. And these advisors were certainly not willing to lie in this bed. But they were certainly willing to lie about the bed they'd made. They're trying to then now distract again from the king and say, oh no, we can do it, but technically we can't because actually what's happened is you've asked something that's never been asked before. This is where lying gets everybody. When someone asks something you haven't anticipated in a lie, it unravels very quickly. And for these guys, it unravels very, very quickly. So when their deception is discovered, the king orders the execution of all wise men. And again, I don't believe he's doing it solely for the reason of one dream, but it did serve the purpose of exposing them as charlatans, the people that claim to be wise, whilst then taking advantage of the king's ignorance. And so it continues, verse 13 to 18. So the decree was issued to put wise men to death. The men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. This Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So imagine the situation here. Daniel knows nothing of this situation. This is not like it's been advertised. This is only within the council of the king. He knows and his friends know nothing about what the king has been asking. He was told about the king's request then, and when he asked about it, and now, through no fault of his own, and through many others, they faced death because a few were lying to the king. He speaks to the guard, it says, with wisdom and tact, and I think this is a really important point here. You remember in the previous chapter we did last week, God gives Daniel and his friends something of great importance. Daniel 1:17 says, to these four young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Now, what Daniel did not need to do was say to the guard, hold on, let me just ask God what to say to you. There's an element here when you really go into the actions of Daniel, it's not going off on his own, but he is confident in his trust in God. And so the first thing he actually does ask the guard, and he speaks to the guard. This is the reason why he could, I think, engage with this so quickly, is because he is becoming ever wiser and more discerning. So what Daniel's doing is allowing God to mold his ability to be able to make wise choices on the basis of what he has discerned. Maybe an example here would help. When we're faced with a situation, it is right to pray and ask God for guidance. But I also want to show you that in the experience of those situations, God teaches us how to grow in being wise and discerning for the next situation. Now, what I'm not saying is as you grow in that, in being wise and discerning, that we need God less and less. What actually happens is, and I think this is how it works, is that our conversations, our prayers with God become less childlike. They become more mature in our interactions with God than when they were before. So with each situation, God shows us how we can learn from the last situation, and we gain a bit more experience and a bit more wisdom, be a bit more wise and a bit more knowledgeable, a bit more understanding. And so what we're not going to do in the next situation is then repeat again and ask exactly the same thing. Now what we're going to do, we're going to have a more mature conversation with God for the next situation. And so it keeps going on and on. We grow in our relationship with God. We get more mature as we understand the learning from each situation. It becomes ever more mature the more we learn from God. So when we go back to him, the level of interaction with God becomes more mature, more revealing, and so we trust him more and more. We are able to understand God that little bit more. We learn from our experience in every situation, and the more we trust in him to reveal more to us, the more we trust in him again. And it comes back to this saying, I've heard this a long time ago, and I never really understood it. I thought it was something that Christians would say a lot and not really know the meaning of it. But this term, God is more. And I think it needs to be redefined as to what that is. We're quite comfortable, I think, sometimes. I don't want to say this because I've also heard videos on this, which it sounds terrible. We do box God in a bit. We do say, this is what God is. This is it. I've defined God as this. But God is always more than that. God is always more than the God we think he is. He's always more. And sometimes that isn't because there's something necessarily bad we're doing, but it's because how can this mind fully understand an infinite God, an infinite, merciful, loving God? How can this small mind understand that? Ephesians 3, verse 20 to 21 says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be glory in the church and Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. To him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. This is Daniel. This is also Daniel right here, right? Daniel has the confidence to go to the king right now, this first step, because he knows his God can do so much more than what he can do. He knows that God can use and will use this situation to bring glory to himself, to reveal himself through this event. So Daniel goes straight to the king, asks him for more time to interpret the dream for him, and notice what he does not say. He does not say to see the dream and then interpret. He says, I will interpret the dream for you. The assumption being made is that he will definitely see the dream. Now, that's not because Daniel's got any particular ability in himself, but he knows God will deliver, and he trusts him. He trusts in God to do that. So he said, I will interpret the dream, but all I need time for is to interpret the dream. I know God's going to give me what the dream is. And we'll see that later on, certainly in next week's sermon. His confidence in God meant he knew that God would not fail him, especially since we learn that God gave him the ability to interpret dreams. So God would not give him that ability were it not that God could also show him the dream. And we then see Daniel and his friends seek God earnestly in prayer to see the dream and so interpret the dream. And I want to just show again this idea of maturing in wisdom and in experience. Daniel knows he's been given these abilities to interpret dreams and visions, but now he must use them. Verses 18 to 19 in our reading says, he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. So even though he has knowledge and this ability to interpret dreams and visions, his prayer to God is one of further acknowledgement that God is the only one that can reveal it. This given ability didn't puff up his ego. He didn't get proud because he has this ability. Didn't make him think it was his own ability, his own cleverness even. Rather that God would use him and this ability when God deemed it right to do so. He had confidence in all God could do and would do. And so what he's understanding is God's given me this knowledge and understanding and this ability. So there's going to be a reason. There's going to be a reason why I've got this. God's going to use it at some point. And yes, when we look at the prayer, or when the direction of the prayer, he does pray for his own life and his friends' lives too. But that's natural, right? We don't want to die unnecessarily. I mean, I'm sure Daniel would be open to it if it was the will of God. But also, he's saying, well, he definitely feels, senses, and probably knows through his trust in God that this is not the end of the journey for him, that there's more for him to do. So he prays, yes, for his own life, but I believe he wanted to be spared so that he would show the mercy and power of his God, his king, to the king. He knew he was going to be used as this way to show this amazing God that he trusts and believes in. Hebrews 4 verse 16 says, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Daniel's doing this. This is what he's doing. But not just for himself, primarily. He knows, I think I can read this and see that he knows he wants to do it to serve God. He knows God can use him to speak to the king. And so it continues, Daniel 2, 20 to 23, and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives them wisdom. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, O God of my fathers. You've given me wisdom and power. You've made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. And I think this is where we come to the crucial application, I think, for this message today. First of all, Daniel acknowledges that God has wisdom and power. He said he commands the season and controls who rules the kingdoms. But I just want to focus here on the second part of verse 21. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. And when you just really think about this statement here, wisdom is not given just simply because he bestows it upon a person. Wisdom is given, says, to the wise. So Daniel is wise. Knowledge, says, is given to the discerning, the understanding, as it were. So there is a thing that needs to be done here in order to understand how God gives us wisdom and how we should receive it. Daniel was wise enough to trust God and discerning or understanding enough to be granted knowledge from God. I could have included in here, I don't know how many verses from Proverbs about wisdom. And if you've ever read Proverbs even a bit, there is so much about wisdom within that. And I couldn't include that many. But even when you read that and you see this as well, this wisdom, this godly wisdom, it's not a magic trick. It's not a magic trick. It's not what those so-called wise men were trying to do and failing at. They don't have any wisdom. They have earthly, worldly wisdom, but it's flawed. It's pointless. They had no connection to godly wisdom because they were, as the text says, not wise. They had no knowledge from God because they did not desire to understand. And I think this is where I believe this is where the danger lies for us as believers. Many, as I read at the start, the reason for going through Daniel in part, many are so obsessed with the spectacle of what God might give us in abilities and gifting that I think we're in danger of no longer wanting to pursue understanding and how to be wise. Do you know why we might do that? And I think I'm guessing here, because I'm only guessing from my own experience. I think because pursuing understanding and to be wise is a bit boring. I think seeing the spectacle of what Daniel could do, interpretation of dreams, and then later on, as Angela's conveniently opened the Bible to, later on we'll see these amazing visions, focus so much on that we actually leave behind the fundamental reason why we're learning from Daniel and many others. It is to gain understanding of this amazing God. It is to get to understand who he is, his character, what he has done. Even now, sadly, in my own experience that I've seen, many churches are afraid of teaching scripture and instead generalize and sum up entire books of the Bible in one 20-minute sermon. We're on a dangerous road, church. Dangerous road where we're falling to trying to keep people enticed. So we take the book of Job and we try to sum it up in one 20-minute session. Have you seen how big the book of Job is? Have you seen that there's not one lesson in there? There's multiple life applications for a Christian in that book. And I think what we're getting worried about is losing people. We're getting worried too much about people walking out the door because we're asking them to use their brains. We shouldn't be worried about that. If people leave because they're being challenged too much by having to think about things, God bless. I really hope you come back. I really hope that you come back and learn more about this amazing God. But I don't think it's going to do you any good to find a place where you can just find some light touch scripture, light touch learning. This whole life as a Christian is learning. You will walk this Christian life learning every day about yourself, about the further depths we can go to be sinful. But then understanding this gracious, merciful, loving God who is unlimited in power, unlimited in grace, unlimited in mercy. But Christianity is not a litany of clever sayings. It's not neat cliches that fit into a convenient life lesson. The Bible is a book to be carefully thought through. It is to be carefully applied with context, relevance, and dare I say, knowledge and understanding. And I think this is where we come back to our point about wisdom. Only then can we even ask God for wisdom. Because our intention, if we want to understand God, guess what the gift is? The gift is wisdom. You can't just simply ask for that just because you want some wisdom. We're going to have to learn about this amazing God. We're going to have to dive into the scripture. Learn about his amazing character, which is just so vast you won't know in this lifetime. But that should also spur you on. That this book will never end. This lesson will never get boring. We might go through Daniel in about 2 years' time, and it'll be an entirely different set of sermons. Because there's always something new in the scriptures that we've missed. But if you want to hear from God, we must trust in God. To trust in God is to be prepared to be diligent and determined to learn more about him. That is the only way Daniel knew. He was trusting in him, and then he was going back to him. Trusting in him, stepping out a bit further, and then going back to him. But every time his relationship with God is maturing, he's growing up, he's becoming more mature in the faith. And this is the home I'm talking about that we need to make for that godly wisdom to flourish. If you want wisdom from God, we need to prepare this place in our heart and our mind so that we can have this wisdom grow, this wisdom teach us and learn from it. A heart and mind that seeks to grow in understanding of God and become wise through the knowledge of God. And then truly come to know his love for us through the work of Jesus Christ. This lesson of Daniel will repeat again and again of his determination to keep stepping a bit more forward, a bit more trusting in God each time. But I would argue this, Daniel does not stay the same by the end of this book. I would argue that from when he began to when he is finished, this is almost a different man in terms of his relationship with God. He is so trusting in God that he does all sorts of amazing things, that God uses him for such amazing events and such amazing things that even Daniel, I don't think, could understand, but he learned from it, and I think he grows from it. And I think that should be a lesson for us too, if we're talking about wisdom here. We need to be learning about this amazing God through the Bible, not shortcutting the process. Don't be afraid to spend a short amount of time on a few verses learning about this amazing God. Don't be afraid. Trust in God as he has been telling us to do all this time. So I'm going to leave you with this verse here, and then we'll have some time of worship together. Colossians 2:2-3, my purpose is that they may be encouraged in heart, united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I'm going to pray, and then we'll worship together.